This is our last panel. Thank you so much. We knew we'd still have a crowd if we put the panel about the South last in the day. So, strategy. I just wanted to say, acknowledge that the food history team, and we are a team, we work very collaboratively. Contrary to what one of our panelists said this morning, I didn't do this all myself. Yes, I am the director of the food exhibition and a curator here, but we work very collaboratively. And so you met Ashley Rose Young, our historian, on panel 2. Steve Velasquez, if Steve's here, he's a curator and also here at the museum. Adam, you've met. But we also have people who have been in and out because, of course, it takes a village to do this. If you're on the food team, please, Velasca, where are our people? Please raise your hand and say hello. Great. Anyway, I wanted to acknowledge everybody's hard work on this, to thank you again for coming, and to encourage you to, yes, we've got this great panel on the South, but then we have happy hour. So stick around for it all, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. It helps to have such a leader in our teams, so thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you are here to join us for the last roundtable of the day, Remixing the South, where we will explore the changing dynamics of Southern food, both past and present. As always, please tweet any audience questions using hashtag Smithsonian Food, or write questions on the cards and hand them to our ushers on the sides. Our moderator is Joe Yonan. Joe is the food and dining editor with the Washington Post and the editor of America the Great Cookbook. Joe and his team of food writers at the Post have inspired people all across DC metro area and beyond to care about food, from production to consumption, and across regions, cultures, and generations. Joe?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today, and so happy to be leading a panel about my favorite part of the country. I was born in the South, thankfully, because I've always considered myself a Southerner, but I was raised in Texas, which means I can't be called a Texan because I wasn't born there. So that's why I'm always happy to be part of the South. So with me today, I have an incredible panel. I have to make one clarification. Matt Rayford was not able to join us here today because of a family medical emergency. I think everybody's fine, but he needed to cancel his trip. But we have Sandra Gutierrez, who is an incredible bilingual journalist and award-winning author of 4 cookbooks, national expert on Latin American and Southern regional cuisines, and the 2017 Grand Prize winner of the MFK Fisher Award for Excellence in Culinary Writing. Heavy hitter. Her book, The New Southern Latino Table, was selected by the Smithsonian to form part of the exhibition Gateways Portales at the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum. Next to her is Michael Chwitty, culinary historian and food writer from Washington, D.C. His first major book, The Cooking Gene, A Journey Through African American Culinary History in the Old South, won a couple little awards at the James Beard Foundation's Awards Gala in May. It was so fun to see that. It just happened to be, I don't know, Book of the Year. Yeah. Honestly, a truly amazing project. If you don't know about it, you should dig in. And Sam Vong is curator right here at the Museum of American History, where he's building collections related to Asian Pacific Americans in the U.S. He got his PhD from Yale, and before working here, he taught on race, ethnicity, and migration at my alma mater, UT Austin. And as a public historian, his work focuses on how Asian Pacific Americans have played an important role in U.S. history and in shaping American institutions and culture. So this is your panel. So I thought I would start with just a small question, which is, which, what is the South?
I'm going to go last, though.
What is the South? I mean, I think that it's a question that's sort of at the heart of a lot of issues about Southern food and the definition of Southern food. How do you think of the South, Sandra?
I think of the South, the states southern of the Mason-Dixon line, but my South, or my interpretation of the South, does not include Texas and California.
Right.
I stop there. Sorry. Like you said, you're not a Texan if you're not born there.
Texas is a whole
And
other country.
it has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with Texas not being part of the South in the traditional way of thought, but because of the work that I do and discovering food movements and everything, I find that Texan and Californian cuisines have a lot of Mexican-centric cuisines, and Southern regional foodways, the way I interpret them, does not only relate to Mexican-centric cuisines, but more of a Pan-Latin experience. So that's my long story for the short question.
Twitty, what's your South?
So it goes like this. I respect my longtime friend Sandra's answer. I would say, however, that it's not you can't just block out states on a map and call it the South, because we have to talk about migration. We have to, people have been in-migrating, out-migrating, in-migrating, out-migrating. You have to talk about the fact there are multiple Souths. So to expect, and I think movies and sitcoms and social media have made this even worse, because no one in 1850 expected to walk into Baltimore and find Mississippi. But they did expect to walk into the South. And for a lot of people today, they can't wrap their heads around it. But make no mistake about it, the minute you hit one of the largest cities in America, it was a southern city, much like DC was and is. And if you're part of the chocolate population, your South is East Texas. Yours, where the cotton plantation, the whole reason why there is a Texas is because of the argument between slavery and freedom with Mexico and the Anglo-Texans. But the South it's a lot bigger than that. I think, unfortunately, one of the questions we often face is Southern versus Soul. And it's because white Southerners have dominated the conversation on what gets to be defined as Southern,
Right.
which is quite unfortunate. To round up my answer, I would say is this. I feel like I'm in a beauty contest. I believe in Gerald Ford and peace, right?
World peace,
World
right.
peace, right?
As long as there's not a
win.
swimsuit competition,
Right.
we're fine.
Baby, we the best ones. But it's like this. There's no grits line.
Right.
That's a myth. There's no sweet tea line. It's like these myths we make up. Like the first time I heard it was like when I was going down. You have to do a bus trip into the Deep South. You can't do it any other way. And this lady in front of me says the words, turns around. She's African American, reminds me of my grandmother, same complexion, same green eyes, all the thing. And she goes, I can only get grits when I come down. She was from New York. When I come down south. I'm like, baby, you can go to Harlem and get some grits. Stop lying. So we have these mythologies, but it's based on this kind of like love we have for the sense of place.
That's right. Okay. All right, I'm going to build off what these both you said. For me, for someone who was born in Vietnam and grew up in Los Angeles, the South is kind of a new thing for me. Even though I lived in Texas for 3 years, and I never considered Texas as part of the South, but having grown up, having lived there for 6 years, in many ways I do. But I would say that this idea of, I think in the popular imagination, the U.S. South is something we always think of, we associate with the Civil War or this dichotomy of black-white relations. And I think since the 1970s, that has changed dramatically with new ways of migration, and during the 1980s with industries shifting from the coast to parts of this different states in the South. has kind of drawn in new populations that has really transformed, I think, the racial and ethnic landscape of different cities and states in the South. So when I think of the South, I think of this term that scholars like Perla, Guerrero, and other scholars have kind of thought about the South as the Nuevo South, which I think is very emblematic of these demographic changes, right? So Nuevo meaning, this is the Spanish word for, it translates to new, and it's juxtaposed with the South, which kind of signifies this
Old.
the old South, but also kind of invokes the idea that there is new migration and this is no longer the black-white binary that we often think about.
Which is why in my work I removed Texas and California from the equation, because it is the Nuevo South, and migration and the history of foodways in California and Texas is so much older. And if we can get into the debate of is it a Mexican territory or an American territory, until we're blue in the face, and I'm not Mexican, but we could get into that. And when I look at Southern foodways, I'm looking at the history of shared strife and enslavement and poverty and feeding from the land that the traditional Southern region shares with the chain of all 21 Latin American countries. And so it's a different story, which is why my South may look a little bit different than yours and yours.
Yes.
Or a lot different. We'll say a lot different. Or a lot different. But that is, it's based on the studies, on the way that the studies go. So I guess in a way we could say that the South is a state of mind, just like California is a state of mind, you know.
Right.
And the South is really, you know, bless your heart. It's
Well, it strikes me that there's this dichotomy too between this idea of the South as being more cohesive or more defined region than maybe other regions in America, which I think is a debatable point. And on the other end of the spectrum, Eduardo made a really interesting point in the previous panel about, the hyper-regionality of the South, which I think you started to hint at a little bit in your first answer. So which is it? I mean, is the South cohesive, or is the South more or less cohesive than other parts of the country? Both.
It's both.
I agree.
It's because there is the idea of being up south as well. The idea that we became a Southern diaspora, the great migration of Black Americans, but also the migration of Appalachian and Mississippi Delta white Americans, the Okies, the Arkies. People forget. I mean, I remember going to California and wondering why Huntington Beach and Anaheim and those areas, there was something about it. I was like, okay, something's weird here. Then I realized that these are the same white folks that were living in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. You go to Detroit, you're wondering, why do you white folks that, okay, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama. You get it? And it's like, and then we forget about the fact that the cattle trails took Southerners all the way up into the Rocky Mountains. All those people have roots that eventually end up on a family tree right back, Virginia or Carolina, one of the two. And that's what makes it so frustrating, but amazing too. And this is why I think so many people feel they have a stake in the South.
Right.
But I want to say one quick thing. Sitting betwixt on a very diverse panel, we have an Assyrian American, Guatemalan American, a Vietnamese American, and African American of multiple bloods. This has always been the South.
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody says about John Smith, forget him. No, there have been Filipinos and Asian people in Southern communities for 250 years, if not 300. There's always been a Spanish-speaking South. There has always been a Middle Eastern South.
Yep.
There has always been a Muslim South. And if we don't know how intersectional and multicultural the South is, we don't know what being an American is.
Right. That's a great point.
I'm a mix.
Hashtag.
And I think that really goes back to what you earlier said, that there are multiple Souths, and
Yeah.
there's not this singular or monolithic.
Right.
Right?
But what makes the
But-
South so, I think, interesting right now, the reason we're trying to find a sense of place and a sense of belonging is the fact that for many centuries, like, after the Civil War, at least, the South has been stereotyped.
Uh-huh.
And it has been looked down upon. And all of a sudden, in the last 25 to 30 years, the South and Southern regional cuisine has really been the focus of a lot of study and a lot of pride for the American people. It's truly one of the most, I would say, authentic American cuisines that you'll find, precisely because it's a cuisine born of a melting pot.
Right.
And it's not a cuisine born in high-end kitchens. It's a cuisine that's been very organic in the way that it's formed. It's by the people, for the people. And so I think that's important. And we do have a lot of division in the discussion of race and foodways, but a lot of healing that's going on in the South today. So I think that's what, where is the South? I think it's complicated right now, but it is, we're finding our place.
Yeah, I think that the stereotypes are a really interesting thing for us to talk about a little bit. John T. Edge refers to it as the moonlight and magnolias phenomenon. This gauzy picture of the South that probably was never really true. I'm curious how you each think that shows up in the food, in the perceptions of the food. What are the stereotypes about Southern food that you wish people would get over?
Oh my goodness,
No,
that's
I think you
a
have
short
a
question.
very, anybody can, you can do that. I mean, first of all, fried.
Fried.
Oh my God, if I hear one more person say it's all fried, that's why you're all dying of heart attacks. Shut up. Well, I mean, look at how the Cajun food has, because it's taking on maybe not a stereotype, an archetype of Southern food, which is spiciness, and going, okay, crawfish, shrimp, collard greens instead of bok choy, do a little rice. Okay, we can work this. And it's playing on that. That's what you have. One of the things that kills me is when I was looking, don't ever read Amazon reviews of anything.
Ooh. So
So
true.
you're going to appreciate this.
We all know.
Edna Lewis, after she got posthumous fame from Top Chef, someone actually wrote the words, "This isn't an authentic Southern cookbook. Where are the true Southern recipes?" I'm like, oh my God. So there's a Southern expression that I love. I hope you know this one. My grandma would say this all the time. I read that review and I thought that Edna Lewis was going to jump out of her grave and snatch that person bald-headed. Like, what do you mean by true Southern? And it's because Edna Lewis didn't come from collard green country. She
Right.
didn't come from Spanish moss country. She came from basically Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, Orange County, Albemarle County, which is an hour and a half's drive from here. Well, the ecosystem is no different from here. It's just simple country farms. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that you do have Latinx and Asian American communities expanding the idea of being Southern. But also for me, the beautiful thing was when I was in New Orleans and I was meeting people in the Vietnamese community there, and I was meeting Latinx people in Georgia, the Southern wasn't the ingredients. The Southern was the fact they had gardens.
Yeah,
And they were looking at nature and going, what can I?
it's food from the land. It's food from the soil.
Yes.
But again, going back to the fact that the South has always been a melting pot, barbecue. The term
Yep.
barbacoa.
Another connection.
The term barbacoa is a Latino term. It's from the Taino Indians in what is today modern Dominican Republic. So the technique of barbecuing, cooking meat directly on fire, usually on a spit, was the original barbacoa. Why is it that in the South we're so big with barbecue? Why is it that in the South barbecue really is, I think, one of the most beautiful art forms that African Americans have expanded on in the South? Well, it is the transition of people coming from Latin America into the South. Enslavement did not start in the South. It started in Latin America. It was the Portuguese who started bringing enslaved people from Africa so that they could make up from all the millions of people that they had killed, whether it was on purpose or by disease, in Latin America.
Right.
It was the sugar, it's the bittersweet story of Latin America and the South. We're so tied together.
Right.
And so barbecue is then carried on into the South by, not by Latinos, but by Africans into the South. But so there's another intertwining there of cultures. It is a melting pot. To me, one of the biggest stereotypes is that the South was only white food, and then only white and black, and it erased all of the brown and all of the colors in between. And we're now coming to the realization that when we're talking about a melting pot in the US, the real melting pot in food waste is in the South. Fried anything comes from the Portuguese. The Portuguese invent fried food, battering food. And Africans learn the technique and start battering and frying foods. And again, it comes that way. There's fried food all over Latin America that comes through that passageway. So there is this very deep connection. And so myself, today, I am a new Southern Latina. I am a new Southern. I was not born in the South. I'm actually a Yankee, y'all. You know, and I was born in Philadelphia, if you can't pick up the accent yet. It's from the wrong side of the tracks. Via Guatemala to the South. So I'm a new Southern Latina. I see the South from a different lens that is more inclusive than what history books have told us the South or Southern foodways really is.
Amazing. So where do you see soul food coming in to the equation, and the debate and disagreement about soul food versus Southern food, about who's cooking your food, about where do you see that?
I gotta remember what Dan Pashman said just yesterday. I was doing a podcast for the Sporkful, and he said something that was so accurate and so cut to the chase about this. He said, Southern, it's place, I think it's place versus identity. One is about place, one's about identity. And I've often defined soul food as the memory cuisine of the great-grandchildren and great-grandchildren of enslaved people, who then, you know, much like our ancestors had to keep moving, moving to the Northeast, moving to the Midwest, moving to the West Coast. And now soul food has picked up, because that's what it does, elements of Afro-Caribbean communities, because, you know, we were redlined into living in the same communities. So we had no choice but to know each other, marry each other, create music. There's no hip hop without African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos mixing. It could only have come from that mixture. Same thing with the food. It's developed new legs. When black folks moved to southern cities, we then became the people who made yakame and yak. And if 15 other versions of basically Africanized chow mein dishes, right? Yeah. And then it became some tamales in the Mississippi Delta. And then you just kept on picking up all these different elements. And then you talk to my East Texas cousins who grew up eating collard greens, black eyed peas, all the rest of it, and barbecue. And now asados on top of that. Exactly. And now this. So it's really a dynamic tradition. And it's a tradition that kind of absorbs. You know, there's no black family now that's cooked without adobo. You know, see, how did our kitchens become Filipino as well as this, as well as that? It's just because, you know, every time somebody marrying into the family, you'd be like, what you got in that spice box? You know, it's just, and we've always been, to Sandra's point, this people who have both created and absorbed, without any sort of compunction about, okay, I see you, I see that, I want to do some of that, I want to work with that. So soul food is so dynamic, and I think that sometimes they coexist with each other. There's some Southern cuisines that just aren't as shaped by or shaped with people of African descent.
That's right.
And so those don't exactly always match up. So when we see things like, what's that called? Ronnie, what's that sour corn in the jar thing? Black folks don't know
Chow
about that.
chow.
Yeah, right? We don't know about that. We know about the other chow chow, but not that chow chow, right? So it's like there's room for diversity. And as we encounter new forms of Southern cuisine, Latinx, Asian, Middle Eastern, guarantee we're roping those in. There was no barbecue spaghetti until we were like, oh, we can do this. That's just a black mother going, we can do this, like everything else. Creating culture, creating freedom.
But I think also with soul food, it's food that has connection to the land, to people, but also to the movement of people.
Right.
And when I look at soul food and I see, for instance, Brazilians eating collard greens in a very different way that we eat in the South. In the South, we cook them down with some pork fat and deliciousness until they're soft. In Brazil, you shave them and you saute them quickly with garlic and olive oil. But to me, there's the similarity of the same ingredient that has traveled, the food, and the way we cook it is different. But there's this connection to the land. It's that basic basket of ingredients that then starts growing through the mixing, again, of people and need. I don't think that in differentiation with any other cuisine in the United States, Southern cuisine has this history of strife, of pain, of scarcity, if you will, making do with what you had and building upon that. And I think there's a lot of, to me personally, when I listen to the story, when I read Edna Lewis, when I read what's Tony Tipton Martin's work, when I read your work, when I read Adrian Miller's work, there is that sense of finding a place where that scarcity, that land is all revered. That's still part of the plate in soul food. And I think Southern food wouldn't be Southern food without soul food, not the other way around.
Sure.
Yeah. So do you think that the connection, really the definition of soul food as a migratory cuisine, do you think that is one of the reasons why the rest of America is so fascinated by foods of the South and by the South in general? Is it because of the migration and why?
Ours just tastes better.
Right.
It's delicious food.
Well, it's just better.
Delicious
Okay.
food. It's good
All right.
food.
There is
Okay.
no New England. Hold up. Where is a national New England restaurant chain? I ain't talking about Red Lobster. Where is the national Southwest chain talking about Chipotle? Where's the national Pacific Northwest is a fantastic region to grow up in and have
Yes.
food from. Where's the chain at?
Right.
Where's around? But Southern people, start plump.
A&W?
Start.
You got
So Southern people,
Popeyes,
we
you got
Pop- we got
Cracker Barrel.
Yes.
We have fine tourist destinations people come to.
That's
We got
true.
it locked down. Bye.
That's true.
Joe, some clubs you can join and others you got to be born in.
What's that? Say that
Say
again.
some clubs you can join and others you got to be born
You
in.
had to be born in. Yeah.
I don't know.
We got you. We
Are you
got you.
adopting me, Michael?
I'm adopting both
Okay.
now.
So I'd like to talk more about the so-called New South, the newer immigrants, refugees, and transplants who have continued to redefine the food of the South. How do you see Southern food now differently from 20 years ago?
There's a huge difference, and that's what I base my work on. The Latin influx into the South is undeniable, and it's very interesting, and it's very different from what's happening in other parts of the country. And the South was hermetically sealed to Latin immigration until the 1990s, when NAFTA comes into place, and also all the laws that allow refugees and war victims to start moving. So what happens in the South, or where I defined the South originally, is that Latin Americans from all 21 Latin American countries, and there are 21 countries with 21 different cuisines, that one has nothing to do with the other. Different ingredients and even different Spanish language. We speak Spanish, but we don't all speak the same Spanish. Start descending into the South, or ascending into the South. And we come from all different kinds of economic and social strata. So it's a very different migration set. We're not, the movement of the culinary movement that I discovered in 1996, and I coined the term the New Southern Latino movement, was not an organized movement, and it was not a movement that could have happened anywhere else in the world. We had the same three ethnic groups at the roots of our movement, African Americans, Native Americans, different groups, of course, and the Europeans, particularly the Iberians. We had the same basket of ingredients, exactly the same basket of ingredients: squash, corn, beans, pork, etc. And we had the same cooking techniques, the exact same cooking techniques. Have people migrating from all different Latin American countries into the South, and there's going to be an adaptation, and there's going to be a mutual adaptation. So it's not that we're replacing Southern food, it's just that Southern Foodways is growing a new branch in the big tree of Southern Foodways. So like you have Cajun, you have Low Country, you have soul food, and now you have the new Southern Latino table. It is going to change Southern Foodways. Definitely it will. And if you've ever had a sandwich with chipotle mayonnaise, or you've ever put a little bit of jalapenos in your hush puppies, or if you've ever put, you're cooking the movement and you're eating it too. It's happened.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen in restaurants. It happened organically in people's homes. It's just now reaching restaurant level. Now it's there, but it's permanent. And that's what I mean. Sometimes we get along on the plate. We meet on the plate faster than we do in the mind. And that's what's happening. So it's changing.
Do you see other immigrant communities?
I do. I see Vietnamese is huge. I see a lot of Muslims. You go to Nashville, for instance, and you have a huge Muslim community, and the way that they're cooking food, and they're roasting goat and lamb on spits now, and calling that barbecue, and making barbecue in Nashville like that. Greek is, of course, huge still. And Greeks are interesting because they run a lot of restaurants historically, right? All of the Greeks in the South.
People forget this. Until the Italians, the Greeks, Sephardic Jews came to the Deep South, meaning Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, right? People, a restaurant in the South meant a place in a hotel, a tavern, or someone's home.
Or a train station.
Or a train station. It did not mean a cafe, a diner. There was none of that. You wanted a plate of food. You were a guest of someone. You went to the back door of somebody's house.
That's right.
And you bought a plate at the back of the kitchen, and you went home with it. Or you ate food from the side of the road or at market. When the Greeks come, I think it was something like 90% of all the restaurants in Alabama, including Nikki's. Nikki ain't no Southern name. Nicholas, right? Nikki's West, right? In Birmingham. Those were all Greek restaurants. Then the Lebanese came behind them, same model.
Yep.
The Turks, the same model.
Yes.
And so you see that everywhere you go, and it's just like, no, we to the point of both of these wonderful scholars, we've never just been a salt and pepper people.
And I would think that refugees and immigrants have played a very influential role in the past several decades in not only kind of food practices and southern cuisines, but also in food production. Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I do is to look at the workers in different industries like shrimping and crabbing, or even in farming in like North Carolina, and you see a lot of new immigrants and refugees working in these industries. And so for one thing that I look at is the Texas shrimping and crabbing industry in the Gulf Coast, where many Vietnamese refugees were resettled along the Gulf Coast, and they began working in shrimping and then later on the crabbing business. And they have really carved out a very powerful economic niche there. And in the process have also introduced like Vietnamese Cajun cuisine, and you see these Vietnamese Cajun cuisines sprouting up all across the South, but also in places like San Jose in Southern California. Right?
And definitely Mississippi and port cities.
Right.
So what aspects of Southern food do you think are there any aspects of Southern food that you think are immovable? Like, what are the essences of Southern food that will always be there despite the influences? Sugar.
We will always have the sweetest palate in the U.S. Sugar.
Why?
I
it was
think
raised
it was
there?
still it was grown there, and it was still part of our history in the South. It's that bittersweet history of the South, Sugar is, I think, super important in every culture that's coming into the South today too. So it's something that I don't think we'll ever see change. Sugar, pork, lard, and corn.
Corn.
Corn will never be. I think we go back to the ingredients of the land.
I would like to see more Southern cooks and chefs follow the beautiful example of Chef Sean Sherman and take Southern food back to its indigenous Creek, Choctaw, Powhatan, Chittimacha, etc. roots. Because it's one of, I think that, and also just taking things back to their African roots. I think one of the mistakes people make, you know, we talk about sugar, but so that's some people, Mary and Nestle, wherever you are, I know you're cringing. But, you know, that's our celebration food. We want to make that very clear.
It's the happy food.
Oh, it's happy food. We are wondering and hoping, how can we get, you know, the next generation of Vietnamese American Southerners don't have both feet in that world. The next generation of Mexican, Central American, and South American Southerners do not have both feet. They talk with a twang. They have all those. They are Southern teenagers. They are not exotic people. They're not un-American. They are in the land. So for me to think of the future and the kind of like scoping, it just seems to me like we need to go back to indigenous native traditions in the South for their cultural and health value, and also getting the part of Southern food that does come through the Caribbean, Latin America, directly to the South to reflect those traditional African cooking methods, techniques, and ingredients, which are nourishing, healthful, and empowering.
Which are good for us. I think it's bringing cooking back home as opposed to eating all these processed foods that is being fed to us. We need to bring cooking back home. And when you cook from scratch and you're cooking with really good ingredients, and the South is a very interesting area now because much of the South is like the way California used to be. You know, California was cutting edge in getting farmers markets and respecting the land. That's happening in the Deep South now. And we have an opportunity to shift and shift the power of cooking back to the kitchen and back to the home.
So that's a really interesting thread that I wanted to pull a little bit more. How do you think we should go about doing that?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, right? Buy more cookbooks.
I mean, is
We need to start at school. I would love
Okay.
to see every school.
Right.
Yeah. I would love to see every school bring back home ec, and to include gardens, and have the kids have contact with the food, the produce. Not to think that a steak comes from the supermarket, but that it comes from a cow.
Right.
You know, for them to know where food comes from. We need to start them young. I think it's too late for our generation of people who don't cook. Not us. We all cook at home. But I think we need to start at the bottom, start young, when kids are sponges, when they're ready, and when we can save their lives by feeding them healthy, unprocessed, quality food with soul and heart. Because all the food memories are being lost. I think it's sad that for most kids in the U.S., food memories when they're in pain or hurting or depressed are going to be a little box of fries and a little
or
hamburger or
Oreos
whatever, you know,
right.
as opposed to having a plate of butter beans with some bacon fat or maybe a big bowl of frijoles or whatever. You know, the soul, we're losing that. We need to get the soul back into the food.
Yeah, when the previous panel, I was, really struck by the comments by one of the panelists about the kids and the kids learning. You know, by 8 years old, they've caught their first salmon and they understand the importance of eating that way, and that's completely opposite from I
where
think
we're
most
going.
people.
Because you know something, lack of access to land and water. You know, when you talk about, you know, the Low Country, I'm sorry, it's not centered in those urban environments. It's centered in the islands and the creeks. If Matthew Rayford was here, I got to tell you something. One of the most amazing things I ever experienced was going to his farm in Georgia, which was owned by his great-great-great-granddaddy.
Amazing.
Out of slavery. And he said, you know what? My elders told me we will not be cutting down any of those. He's pointing at every single fruit tree, every single bush. Elders said, we can't cut those down because they're productive, and we have to grow this type of thing. And this is how we grew this. And if I want dinner, I can go out to that creek and catch catfish, crab, oyster, whatever I want. But when your land is bought up by resorts, that should have been your damn land in the first place because we were promised it, 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
Immediately, not
Right.
200 years later, well, maybe we'll, no.
Right.
Right then and there, because we earned it. That's the thing people don't get. When you have access to that land, to the country, my grandfather was 99, Gonzalez Twitty, was a tireless activist for black farmers. He helped found the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. That man died at 99 eating roasted sweet potatoes, fish out the mill pond, food from his own land. That's the legacy my granddaddy gave to me. But not everybody has that. So we talk about, the word immigrant has become a dirty word. The country was built by immigrants. And here we have Vietnamese elders, we have Latinx elders, we have Native elders who should be brought into classrooms with grandmama and them. Because you know, grandmama and them in the South is like, why aren't we drawing from our elders to helping them teach the youth and go, you know what, we were in Vietnam, this is what Vietnam, that's how we healed ourselves. We were in Guatemala. This is the things, these are the same, so the white kid goes, oh, I know about corn and this and this. And the black kid goes, I know about that too. Exactly. Another kid goes, oh yeah, that's part of mine. I mean, I used to do this in classrooms when I was able to go into classrooms and just to see kids of all backgrounds all of a sudden go, yeah, I recognize that. I recognize that too. The best thing was when at the end of the day they go, when can I come to your house for dinner? Because then they understand you're not weird, you're not strange, you're human. And I appreciate that about you. Just like you're saying, we have to make this from the ground up. Not everything can be taught in a school, but I think we should also have a culture where it's a two-way street, where we go home and we go, how can I connect what I'm learning with what I'm seeing in my own household? Is it not all, and of course there are class differences and there are economic disadvantages and advantages depending on who you are and where you are. But it's complicated. But the bottom line is, you know, what is it? There it is. 2012, I went to the Donaldsonville Black History Museum, and I saw this plaque on the wall that said, thanks to our farmers that did blah, blah, blah. And I was asking the director, what is this about? She said, black and Creole farmers basically said, we're tired of our sharecroppers going into debt, getting lynched, getting taken advantage of. So we're going to farm a bunch of land in common. And anybody who wants their fresh greens, fresh black, whatever they want, can come to the farm and gather it, take it home, so we're not dependent upon them anymore. So I'm looking at this in 2012, looking back at 1912, going, how come we still trying to figure out the problem how to solve a food desert?
Yeah.
When these folks didn't have no black Twitter, didn't have no Facebook, they had the Klan breathing down their necks, but they still made it possible for a next generation to go to college, to leave sharecropping, to own the land, and to become masters of their own fate. What are we doing wrong?
Right.
Can I just add to that? I think it's such a great point to bring our grandmothers into the classrooms. When I think about, when you mentioned that, I think about when I travel to New Orleans, one of the things I feel like Vietnamese immigrants have brought to New Orleans are these gardens in their front yards. And they're growing bok choy and okra, and they're trading it with their neighbors. And it reminds me a lot of my grandmother who just grew vegetables, and this is what she did as part of the community building in Los Angeles. Right? And so they possess a lot of very local tacit knowledge about how to go about bringing, good food onto the table.
Absolutely. Yeah. I believe it's time for some audience questions. What do we have?
So while our ushers collect the questions, the first question we have from Twitter is we talked about stereotypes of Southern food that you're tired of, and what the audience member on Twitter would like to know, what would be in the future the stereotype of Southern food that you'd like to see?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'd love to see Southern food defined as vegetable-based, more of that vegetable-based, healthy food with celebration items that you can have on occasion, happy food that bring people together and that comes from your gardens in your backyard.
I like that.
I would like to see fried food being healthy. I love fried food. Anything that's fried.
Wow.
Right. Healthy fried food. And we're not talking about an air fryer, by the way. Just to make that clear.
I don't really. I'll skip that one because I'm still like in my dig up everything I can to find about the past.
Yeah.
That I don't know. I'm not like a Southern futurist yet. So
Got it.
moving on.
Got it.
But I look at Southern food with hope, with lots of hope, because it's hope that keeps me going. It's hope that keeps me thinking, let it be the Southern region that brings people together to where we see more of our similarities rather than our differences. Let the Southern table be the place where people come together to have the difficult conversations while we're sharing and breaking bread and having a communion of sorts together. Let that place be the South that brings this country out of a divide and has us working forward.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay. Questions?
The next question goes back to the conversation about how to engage youth. The audience member wrote, what strategies do you propose to engage youth from underserved communities in understanding where food comes from?
So we did this in Asheville just recently. Two mentoring groups, one for the girls, one for the boys. And they came to an event where we had, I don't necessarily like calling it healthy or upscale, because those labels are, the spirit, you're right. We're all right. But labels, I don't know, can be misleading.
They're objective.
Yeah, they're objective. But when these young people are in a community that's struggling, because there's beautiful, gorgeous, Asheville, there's Oasis in the South, and then there's the black community, which was thriving, which is now being gentrified, redlined, just roads built right through it. How are they fighting back? Through peace gardens.
Here we go back to the land.
Where they're growing things, where they're trying to maintain a landscape based on not only beautifying, but also food production.
Reclaiming.
And it's reclaiming, that's it. And it's these teenagers and tweenagers that are doing that work with their elders. That's the thing about it. We all come from cultures where that is the most essential
Right.
link. Not only parent to child, but the elders, not just your blood elders, but your communal elders.
right.
And you is the
Yeah.
most essential link. We can't forget about the human dynamics that these things are centered around. It's not just, you have a precocious kid, you pick up a book, you do your thing. No, it's a spirit that you have to inherit. It's a sense of responsibility and ownership that you literally have to look in your elders' eyes and get from them, and then say to yourself one day, this will not die with me. That is the most Southern thing you can say or think.
Wow. Wow.
So that's it for me.
It's a sense of action.
Right.
I think we are very passive in this country. Like you said, book learning. We're all very good book learners. But if each one of us goes out in our community and finds an undeserved school, let's go back to the children. Let's make sure they're fed. Forget public programs. They're doing their part. Privately, we need to start doing things. Through Les Dames d'Escoffier chapter in North Carolina, we're a new chapter, but one of our causes is to make, we have a program for kids who don't have enough to eat at home, and we make sure that every week they go home with enough fresh food that they cannot find in their food desert so they can cook at home. We can do a small part. If each one of us does a small thing and we take action. It's not just about going on marches and writing articles and raising a storm. Where is the action behind what we're saying? That's the only thing that's going to move our youth forward. We need to get the youth involved in this action. We start as the adults, bring them up with us and say, let's go out there and do something about this. By just telling them, oh, somebody else will solve it, we're just giving them this hope and this passivity that is not going to get them to solve their own issues. We need to go and show them how it's done. It's action.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Excellent.
So we've talked about California and Texas and whether or not they're the South. And this audience member wants to know, where does Florida fit in?
Bye,
The
child. bye.
Florida question always comes down to Florida.
But that's so easy. But that is so easy, though. It's so easy, though, because you know Florida, you know that there's basically, like, there's this, V.
Right.
It's like Jacksonville. So the thing about it is, here's my thing. With any sort of like southern, not southern thing, we have to remember, are we respecting the history? It's like when people talk about Maryland, my dander gets up. And I'll tell you why, because Frederick Douglass didn't come from no Alabama. Harriet Tubman didn't come from no Mississippi.
Right.
No, hell was right here. You know, people were when they couldn't grow tobacco, they grew people. And they put them on those boats from Baltimore and Norfolk every day to become the new black population of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, etc. We were the largest forced migration in American history, was the forced removal of black babies from black mothers. So when people try to deny the enslavement and the history, and they're denying, and also the culture, well, that ain't give me a break. I think one of the word that the three words we've said on the stage, which are not very Southern, which are at the heart of this, is the Civil War.
Yeah.
Because after the Civil War, white Southerners redefined the lines of what Southern meant to them. And in many ways, in very pejorative ways. Not all, but many. And if you know the true history of the Civil War in the South, or as I like to call it, the war between the states, there were huge pockets of the American South that said, we don't want anything to do with this. This is not our culture, this is not our way, we don't want any truck with any sort of breaking up the country, this is not us. But if you hear the people who led the Lost Cause, you would think everybody was down for it.
Right.
And they weren't. And so, yes, beaten biscuits, fried chicken, country ham is Smith Island cake, crab cakes. Okra soup is as Maryland and as Southern as you get. But so are the foods that you find in northern and central Florida, which were created from the same mixture of people,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
It was the first port of entry for many of the people
Exactly.
who came in was Florida. So I do include Florida in the South. I do definitely include it in the New South. I just think that Florida was a melting pot of populations earlier. I think Florida, I'm gonna name cities: Miami, Chicago, New York, LA, Houston are major port of entry of people from all over the world, and migration, which is what makes it so hard to define
Right.
of
Philadelphia.
and Philadelphia, yeah, all the port cities are major cities. So it differentiates Florida from the New South, which is where migration was really, really hermetically sealed for many, many years until laws changed.
And yet all
So if
those
you see
cities
the
have
growth,
Southern elements.
they do, and if you see that the growth of migrants in the 5 cities with the most Latino growth in the last 5 years include DC and include Baltimore. Then there's Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, and I forget the 5th. It's not Florida, it's not Texas. There's one more, I forget. I don't remember. But the thing to me is that the South, again, if we go to find the same roots that I talked about, the same cultures, the same ingredients, and the same cooking techniques, that is what defines the South. To me, that is, again, we're trying to find out what it is, right?
Yeah.
We're still working. There's still a lot of work to do. Come join us.
Maybe time for one more question, maybe? One or two?
So we are all out of audience questions. I think
Oh.
that you've given everyone a lot to to think about, and they're just quote tweeting you.
We're being quote
People.
tweeted.
Surely someone has something else that they want to ask us. Sheila.
So why does Houston have a sort of mixture of Vietnamese and Southern food, where New Orleans, which also has a big Vietnamese population, does not have that mixture?
I think there
They
is that
do.
mixture.
There is.
It's not as pronounced because
Yeah.
New Orleans is much like most southern coastal cities. I hope you'll agree with this. A velvet rope city. Houston is like more.
Yeah, I think it's more pronounced in Houston because it's the third largest
Right.
Vietnamese American population in the United States, and next to I say Orange County area. First, it's San Jose in Northern
Right.
California, then Southern California, and then Houston.
Some people
But-
say that Houston is the city that would exist if LA and New Orleans had a baby. So,
There you go.
yeah.
Yep.
So it might just be that New Orleans is smaller.
Right.
But there's also like a lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's an attitude
A
of
dedication to tradition.
this is
Right.
who we are.
Right.
This is what, and even though there are tons of other influences there,
Right.
you know, it's pretty incredible. But they're like, New Orleans means
Right.
the traditional Creole palate. That's it. The ha.
Right.
Nothing more.
right.
But I think it's exciting, like between all of us, we should have a dinner and a conversation about this because, you know, when I was in Senegal, West Africa, guess what I found? Vietnamese food all over the place. Because the French brought Senegalese soldiers to Vietnam, and Vietnamese came and settled in Senegal. So nobody has a party without spring rolls.
And we were talking, and earlier you and I were talking about Guatemalan chow mein.
Right.
There is
What?
such a thing as Guatemalan chow mein without a single bean sprout in it.
Wow.
Right. Wow.
I think what we should do is have a conversation while we all cook together and sit down and eat together and fix the world. That's what I
There
think.
you go. There you go.
That's what we need to
I'm
do.
down.
You back? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so just kind of to the panel in general, how do you feel that tourist perceptions of a local food change that food in the location? I'm thinking, for example, of Cajun food, which is supposed to be spicy, but it's not.
Nope.
And as a response, Louisiana restaurants are making Cajun food spicy to live up to the reputation or the expectations of tourists.
And it's not Latinos' fault.
I think it's the Vietnamese. People are trying to make it
You know, it's just like people, like that comment about not true Southern recipes, right? It's like they expect the meat in three. And the reality is, a lot of our food was seasonal. There were, you know, people didn't eat collard greens in the middle of the springtime. You know, they didn't eat fried chicken in winter. You know, and you don't know this until you talk to like about 100 of these elders and they go, oh no, we didn't do that all year round. That's not how it worked, because you depended upon what you had on the farm. But I think people's perceptions of, they come to the South, one of the funniest things I ever heard was my friend Rich. He's this 320-pound, 6'5" Yorkshire man. You know, you can imagine him coming to your restaurant, bald head, piercings and everything, big red beard. And he goes, I want some grits. And he thinks grits is some cheese-laden, you know,
Souffle.
salty
Right.
souffle thing.
Right.
And it's this puddle of, he said, it's porridge. And it was, you know, can you imagine this man who looks like he can kill you, and he goes, but it's just porridge.
But to answer your question, I would say restaurant chains are built on stereotypes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I was
So
going to go back to
if
that
tourists
Yes.
don't go to where locals eat, you're eating a stereotype. So that's how it has affected it.
Okay.
But I also think that Paul Padone did that with
Yeah,
blackened
the
red
blackened
fish.
stuff,
Blackened
yes.
fish. He's
Yeah.
burnt fish.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think that it just, rolls.
Well, that's the power of TV, baby. Then we're
Right.
talking about another elephant in the room.
Right.
There are, but there are some places where you go to, and like I don't truck in like a lot of restaurants. I got a grandmama in them. That's my first line of defense. But I don't know what that place is in Louisiana. It's in Lafayette. It's totally crazy and touristy. But oh my God, like we're saying about the Cajun jambalaya versus you can taste it and it's good, and then you have this white chocolate bread pudding. Yes, ma'am. and real pampadu, not the fake stuff. I mean, 2-day-old French bread, cane syrup, and homemade butter. The real deal, Louisiana and real collas. And you're going, despite the 30-foot alligator in the front, and the little tables have like the red and white, the checkers, and they have like little crawfish in them. This place is just the jam. You're just going, wow. You can dance to Zydeco music. I mean, sometimes we need to remember that for Southern people, performance is a huge part. How Sunday dinner is performed, how reunions are performed, dinner on the ground is performed, celebration is performed. So that's what makes us a little bit more funner than other people, is because we to use the word. We should probably close this out with this one.
We do need to close it out.
To use the words of St. Julius Sugarbaker.
Oh yeah.
We Southerners do not put our crazy in the back room. We put them on the
On
front.
the front
On the
porch.
front porch. All right. Thank you.
That was great.
Wow. Thank you, Joe, and the panelists for that fascinating, funny discussion. I don't think we'll ever tire of asking what it is about food in the South that keeps us coming back for more. All the roundtables today, have been incredible, and more than anything, have raised even more questions about the relationship between region and food. We really just scratched the surface. So in the Smithsonian Food History Weekend tradition, let's keep the conversation going. Sandra Gutierrez, Michael Twitty, and Joe Yonan are signing their books right now in 1 East in front of the food exhibition. For those of you who have registered in advance, please join us for a happy hour starting now in the S.C. Johnson Conference Center, which is in west wing of this floor. There will be staff to help you find your way. Please keep in mind we'll be checking IDs upon entry. Tomorrow is another day full of Smithsonian Food History Weekend activities here at the National Museum of American History. The festival lasts all day from 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. with hands-on learning, live cooking demonstrations, talks, and stories that explore the past, present, and future of food and region in America. Check out the full schedule starting on page 11 of your weekend guide, and please come back and join us for the fun. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Please join me once more in thanking all of our roundtable guests. Thank you and enjoy.